Who set up these cameras? Is this a Twin Talks?
It is.
About Kate Bush?
Absolutely. The bandwagon is leaving the station, baby.
So oddly enough, of all the places I could have discovered Kate Bush, it was an interview with Big Boy from Outkast. And he was just talking about Running Up That Hill as being one of his favorite songs. And I'd never heard of Kate Bush or this song.
Or Outkast.
No, and I gave it a listen and immediately fell in love with it and thought this is so different and unlike anything I'd ever heard before.
No, I remember you saying, have you ever heard of Kate Bush? I hadn't, and you showed me Running Up That Hill. And yeah, it blew us both away. We couldn't believe that we hadn't heard it before. Well, let's start at the start. I think her career started with David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Sort of weird, sort of cool. As far as I'm aware, there was a friend of a friend that knew David Gilmour, passed along Kate Bush's demos that she'd been making since she was like a kid. And he was impressed, took them, passed them along to his connections at EMI, and eventually landed her a record deal, which kind of started her actual music career. And it culminated in her debut album, 1978. She was 18, and Wuthering Heights was on that album.
Out on the winding, windy moors, we'd roll and fall in green.
Her actual career really kind of officially started with the release of Wuthering Heights, her first sort of hit single.
Yeah, Wuthering Heights. Again, it's that immediacy thing where it's immediately different. It's a very unique pop song. It's very romantic and like grandiose, and the lift into the chorus is
It's unexpected.
it's so melodic. It's so
Yes.
almost English folk
And
song
very
inspired.
floaty.
Yeah.
Like it becomes very dreamlike. So Wuthering Heights, huge hit in, I think, most of Europe. Became a #1 hit in the UK, which is crazy. Take a listen to that song. Imagine that as a #1 hit today.
Yeah.
You know, #1 in the UK, bombed in the US. Not surprising at all.
Maybe the only artist I can think of that's comparable would be like a Lorde. She's someone else. She's maybe like our generation's closest equivalent to a Kate Bush, where that debut single is a huge hit, and she still has her audience, but has sort of not reached that commercial peak since then. For Kate Bush, it wasn't until Hounds of Love where she had that peak back up into commercial success and kind of crossed over outside of Europe into the US.
When I was a child, running in the light, afraid of what might be.
Yeah, so Hounds of Love, it's one of our favorite sort of art pop records. I'd say it's up there with like Melt by Peter Gabriel or like Low by David Bowie. It's an album that has great singles, a couple of them, maybe some that people haven't heard, like Cloud Busting and Hounds of Love. But it also features a lot of songs that you can just sink into, put on your headphones, and they're just sonic landscapes.
She was the first studio artist, first studio album to have a Fairlight featured on it. And for those that don't know, the Fairlight was a sequencer that allowed you to digitally sample a recording. So it could be of like a violin, for example, and then you could then play that on a keyboard, which was revolutionary. It came out in the late 70s. Peter Gabriel was the first person to buy one. And then it kind of trickled along to other very successful, because this thing was incredibly expensive, musicians like Herbie Hancock, Stevie Wonder, and Kate Bush. And then she used it on an album called Never After, but then continued to use it after that. What? So she used it on the Fairlight, on Never After, and then continued to use it afterwards and used it in. I mean, she had a home studio with like an 8-track machine and a Fairlight and a Lindrum. I mean, she really was like a proto version of what you have now, which is like so many artists have little home studios where they might not necessarily finish their album, but they're demoing out stuff. She was really ahead of the curve with that stuff, and ended up self-producing after starting with Hounds of Love, right?
Yeah, I think everything after 1982.
Just talking about some of the songs and the way they're produced and arranged. One thing I want to point out is just the super creative use of the Fairlight and of sampling. On Cloud Busting, you have this rhythmic bass drum part that sort of keeps the momentum going throughout the song. And then it's just at the tail end of the song where you hear the sort of horn of a train and realize that that pulsing wasn't a bass drum, it was the chugging of train wheels moving along the tracks. And it's just, that's such a cool, clever use of a technology that's brand new. You know, to take these cinematic approaches, this sound design approach with a conventional pop song. Or on Hounds of Love, it opens up with this sample of that
In the trees. It's coming.
from like a 70s horror movie. Like, these are all things that we're so used to now, the use of sampling to sort of enhance moments in songs. And she was right ahead with those ideas and sort of sculpting this landscape, this sonic landscape. Yeah.
Even on a song like Running Up That Hill, all the interesting use of background vocals and the way the song builds emotionally.
Yeah. To get technical, quick shout out to Del Palmer, who him and Kate Bush were a couple for a while there in the 80s. But more importantly, he was a bass player and he played fretless bass. And fretless bass is just such a cool sound. You don't hear it very often, but if you listen very closely on a lot of Kate Bush's stuff from the 80s, you hear that distinctive fretless bass sound. Even decisions like that, to have a fretless bass, because that gives it this floating quality. Like everything is thought out, giving you this
Cinematic. Is
yeah.
the-
And floating it's ironic because the second half of Hounds of Love is about drowning. So there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but
yeah. What's interesting is what happened to her career post Hounds of Love. Obviously, Hounds of Love was a critical and commercial success right when it came out in 1985. And she continued to have success with her audience afterwards, but something we talked about earlier is she doesn't do publicity tours. She doesn't tour her music, or at least not since 1979.
yeah, she went on one tour in her entire career. She went on one tour and it lasted 6 weeks. And she just, I don't know what it was. I guess she didn't.
Just not for her.
Not for her, not her thing. Although in that brief little window of time, she invented the headset, which is just another thing where you're like, what? How is she?
You've all seen it. You've seen Britney Spears or...
Yeah, the sort of, it kind of loops around the ears and has a mic out in front, so your hands are free. A lot of pop artists use
Tons.
it. And Kate Bush was the first artist to use one. And it was kind of jerry-rigged together using coat hangers and like a little miniature microphone. Just so revolutionary.
Yeah, very inventive.
Yeah.
From the get-go. Something we've talked about in the past, I don't know if we've talked about it in an episode, but something we talk about often is how there are so many musicians that if you stuck them in a studio, they wouldn't be able to just pick up instruments and create something that sounds good. There are like 15 other people with them making their product the product that that you listen to. Maybe I'm not putting this in the best terms.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I think the fact that record making is a lot more like filmmaking than a lot of people know. Like everyone knows that with a film, there's a director, yes, but there's also a cinematographer working on making the shots look great. There's actors in front of the camera. There's
Team of
writers behind the camera, lighting crew, sound crew, special effects team.
Yep.
And they're all making this collaborative effort.
Yeah.
You know, and the director is just sort of spearheading that, but it's all this teamwork.
Yeah.
And most major pop albums that you listen to are very similar to that. You have multiple songwriters and multiple people creating the sounds that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Synth sounds and tracking the guitars and tracking the drums and session musicians and you name it. And Kate Bush is this really pure example where you could just stick her in a room with recording equipment, and what you'll get out of that is a Kate Bush album.
Yes.
She doesn't require anyone else to flesh out what makes her her.
And that's why the records sound so unique. You know, Hounds of Love sounds weird. If there was a producer, sort of an executive producer or whatever, in the studio with her, making most of the decisions, Hounds of Love wouldn't sound the way it does.
Yeah, it would probably sound more like other conventional 80s pop albums.
Yeah.
You know, there's something just slightly different about the way that she hears music and wants to present it to people.
He got the feeling they had met before. Uncanny how she reminds him of his little lady.
If you read kind of her history with like her record label and just like dealing with individuals in the music industry, it's pretty obvious that she faced all kinds of barriers that she ultimately kind of pushed through and avoided.
Well, again, I mean, we were talking about the influence on current artists. That influence goes beyond just the sonics. It also goes into the way that women in pop music were treated. You know, historically, it was like there was a very narrow field that you were allowed to play with, and the idea of a woman making pop music that is weird and offbeat and
isn't being sexualized.
Isn't being used as like this vehicle for just fixation on her. And let's be honest, even to this day, I mean, that's the vast majority of women in pop music. That's still kind of the box that
it is.
Artists get thrown into so often, whether they're choosing that or not. And she was one of the first artists to really push through that. There was nothing about the way that she presented herself that had anything to do with her looks, or it was always about something more personal to her.
Yep.
And that hugely shaped what the potential for women in alternative music after the fact. I mean, massively. The whole album of Hounds of Love is really great. The album just before it, called The Dreaming, is incredible. Like the production on that album is really, really cool. Not as conventional. There isn't really a strong lead single on that album, but just the creativity with the way that she arranges songs and the lyrical content. Just it's so unique.
Yeah, we're heading into the fall, and I feel like these records are perfect for like a kind of moody day where maybe there's some rain.
A lot of her music has like a fall or winter feel to
Yeah.
it. She doesn't have summery jams. No. It's not that kind of music.
No, it's not.
So yeah, totally.
Yeah, just in closing, Kate Bush should be talked about the same way David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, Prince, like she's on that level. She should be talked about as a legend and an icon of sort of avant-garde pop music that breaks through to the mainstream.
She's better than the hype around Running Up That Hill.
Totally.
It's more than that.
I still dream.